The Axiom Protocol was the bedrock of galactic peace, a treaty so ancient and absolute that its architects were spoken of only in myth. It governed the flow of trade, the resolution of disputes, and, most importantly, the boundaries of existence for the hundreds of species that comprised the sprawling galactic concordat. At its core was a simple, brutal mandate: some doors are never to be opened. Sol 3, a pale blue dot in an unremarkable spiral arm, was sealed behind one such door. The quarantine, designated Containment Protocol 734, was perfect and perpetual. For 10 millennia, the Concordat had watched the planet, a living museum exhibit of a species deemed too volatile, too ambitious, too pathologically self-destructive to be allowed into the galactic fold. Humanity was a failed experiment, a genetic footnote left behind by the progenitors, and the Concordat's role was merely to observe its inevitable decline from a safe, sterile distance. Dr. Kalen Valerius adjusted the fine-spun collar of his ceremonial robes, the fabric shimmering under the synthesized starlight of the Grand Chamber on Citadel Prime. As the chief adjudicator of the Axiom Council, it was his duty to maintain the balance, to ensure the gears of the galaxy turned without grinding. He was a Xylosian, a species whose billion-year lifespan had imbued them with a patience that bordered on geological. They valued stability above all else, and Protocol 734 was the ultimate expression of that stability. He looked out upon the assembled delegates, the crystalline Ishtar, the gaseous Lumina, the insectoid Cathar, all united by their shared history and their shared fear of chaos. Humanity represented that chaos, their brief, violent history, meticulously catalogued by the Watcher arrays in orbit around their forbidden world, was a testament to their flawed nature. They had risen from the mud, split the atom, and nearly annihilated themselves within a handful of millennia, a blink of an eye to a Xylosian. The Council had seen them claw their way back from the brink, build new empires on the ashes of the old, and reach for their local star system with a reckless, frantic energy that was both fascinating and horrifying. But they were contained, their primitive chemical rockets and fission drives unable to ever breach the quantum resonance fence that surrounded their system. They were a cautionary tale whispered in the hallowed halls of the Concordat, a reminder of what happened when evolution was left unchecked. Kalen was preparing to ratify a minor trade amendment when the disturbance occurred. It was not a klaxon or an alarm, but a profound violation of the chamber's perfect stillness, a single, resonant chime, a sound not heard in centuries, echoed through the hall. It was the sound of an axiom breach. Every delegate, regardless of biology, froze. Heads turned, multifaceted eyes blinked, and gaseous forms swirled with agitation. On the central dais, a crimson rune flared to life, projecting a holographic sphere that pulsed with raw, unfiltered data streaming from the Sol system. The Watcher arrays were screaming. For a moment, there was only confusion. The data was nonsensical, impossible. The energy signature was off the known charts. A violent tear in the fabric of space-time originating from just beyond the orbit of humanity's outermost planet. It wasn't a human ship. Their technology was laughable, incapable of such a feat. It had to be a natural anomaly, a rogue singularity, a cosmic string decay. Kalen's 3 hearts beat a slow, steady rhythm as he sifted through the initial reports, his ancient mind processing the information with cold detachment. Then he sought a detail buried in the cascade of quantum telemetry that made his blood run cold. There was a vessel, a small one, barely a scout ship by Concordus standards, but its design was utterly alien. It was sleek, angular, and fashioned from a material that seemed to drink the light around it. And emblazoned on its hull, perfectly visible to the long-range sensors, was a simple circle, bisected by a vertical line, with a smaller circle at its center. It was a primitive diagram of the human eye, an icon taken from one of their ancient, forgotten space programs. The ship wasn't an anomaly. It was human. The chamber erupted. Voices in 100 different tongues clamored for information, for an explanation. How could a species that had yet to master sustainable fusion suddenly be wielding gravitic distortion drives? How could they have bypassed a quantum fence that was supposed to be infallible? Kalen silenced the chamber with a single, sharp gesture. Panic was a luxury they could not afford. "Dispatch the first response fleet," he commanded, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the chaos. "Subdue the vessel. Do not destroy it. I want to know how they did this." The ship, which the humans called the Stargazer, had not intended to break the quarantine. In fact, its crew of 4 had no idea quarantine even existed. To them, the universe was an empty, silent expanse that had beckoned them for generations. Captain Eva Rostova gripped the command chair, her knuckles white, as the alarms blared around her. The transition from FTL, a drive system they called a phase tunnel, had been rougher than usual. Outside the main viewport, space wasn't the familiar, comforting black they had known. It was a riot of impossible colors, streaked with the light of alien suns and nebulae that shouldn't have been visible from their position. "Status," she barked, her voice tight. "Drives are offline. Navigation is, well, Nav is having a panic attack." Her engineer, Ben Carter, replied from his console. "The star charts don't match anything in our database. It's like we jumped into a different universe." "Dr. Lena Petrova," the ship's xenobotanist and chief science officer, was staring at her sensor readings, her face pale with disbelief. "Ava, we're not in the Oort cloud anymore. We're not even in our galactic arm. According to these gravitational resonance readings, we've traveled over 50,000 light years. That was impossible. The phase tunnel was a new technology, a theoretical marvel they had cobbled together in secret, deep in the Kuiper Belt. It was supposed to fold space-time for short-range hops, allowing them to explore their own stellar neighborhood without spending centuries in cryo-sleep. It was never meant to cross the galaxy in an instant. Before they could process the shock of their location, a new terror presented itself. Reality outside the viewport seemed to ripple, and a fleet of colossal vessels materialized from nothingness. They were monstrous things, organic and metallic at once, like great, armored leviathans of the void. They surrounded the tiny Stargazer, their energy signatures pressing in on the human ship like the fist of a god. A channel opened, unsolicited. It wasn't radio. It was a direct, psychic intrusion, a wave of pure, condensed meaning that bypassed language and slammed directly into their minds. It was a voice of absolute authority, ancient and cold as the space between galaxies. "You have violated the axiom. You are contaminant 734. Power down your systems. Surrender your vessel. Your existence is an error that must be rectified." The crew of the Stargazer didn't understand the words, but they understood the intent. It was the same feeling their ancestors must have felt when facing down a predator in the ancient savannas, the primal, instinctual knowledge of being hopelessly outmatched. On Citadel Prime, Kalen watched the live feed from the first response fleet. He saw the human vessel, a fragile little thing, adrift and surrounded. He saw the bioscans of the 4 occupants, their heart rates spiking, their brains flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. They were terrified. But there was something else in the data. A subtle energy reading from within the human ship that the fleet's sensors were struggling to classify. It was a low-frequency hum, almost biological in nature, emanating from their experimental drive core. Adjudicator. A voice from the fleet commander crackled over the secure channel. The vessel is not complying. Their power signatures are fluctuating. It's their drive system. It's reacting to our containment field. Kalen leaned forward, his calm demeanor finally cracking. You say, reacting how? It's learning, sir. Adapting. It's analyzing the quantum frequency of our field and attempting to find a harmonic resonance. It's trying to phase through it. The concept was absurd. A technology so advanced it could learn and adapt in real time to a Xylosian containment field. It would take the Concordate's finest minds centuries to even theorize such a thing. Yet these primitives, these quarantine mistakes, had seemingly stumbled upon it. This was no longer a simple breach of protocol. This was a crisis of existential proportions. Humanity was not the failed experiment the progenitors had abandoned. They were something else entirely. They hadn't been contained because they were failures. They had been contained because the progenitors had been afraid of what they would become. And now, the lock on their cage was broken. Back on the Stargazer, Ben Carter was working frantically, his fingers flying across a holographic interface. Captain, the drive, it's going haywire. It's pulling in energy from those big ships, feeding on it. I can't shut it down. What does that mean? Eva demanded. It means, Lena Petrova said, her voice a hushed whisper of awe and terror, that we're about to make another jump. And I have no idea where we'll end up. Outside, the alien fleet watched as the human ship began to glow, its hull resonating with an unholy energy. Before the fleet commander could give the order to fire, the Stargazer dissolved into a blinding flash of white light, leaving behind nothing but a fading spatial distortion and a stunned, silent galaxy. In the grand chamber, the crimson rune pulsed once, then went dark. The breach was over. The contaminant was gone. But a new, far more terrifying reality had just begun. Kalen Valerius stood motionless for a long time, the silence of the chamber pressing in on him. He had spent 10,000 years watching humanity, confident in their inferiority, secure in their containment. Now, he understood the truth. The Concordate had not been a zookeeper. It had been a warden, and its most dangerous prisoner had just escaped. He finally spoke, his voice resonating with the weight of ages. Seal the soul system, not with a fence, with a wall, a temporal stasis field. Nothing gets in. And if that ship ever returns, nothing gets out. And find that vessel. Find it. And bring me its creators. I want to look into the eyes of the species that the progenitors themselves saw fit to imprison. His order echoed into the void, a declaration of war against an enemy they had just realized existed. The galaxy had been at peace for millennia, a carefully balanced ecosystem of predictable powers. But a new variable had just been introduced into the equation. A human variable. And for the first time in his long, stable life, Chief Adjudicator Kalen Valerius felt the cold, unfamiliar touch of fear. The axiom had been broken, and with it, the peace it had so carefully maintained. The age of humanity had begun, not with a treaty or negotiation, but with a jailbreak. And the universe would never be the same. The second jump was not a transition. It was an act of cosmic violence. For the crew of the Stargazer, it felt like being unmade and reassembled atom by a blind, mad god. When reality finally cohered, it was to a silence more profound and terrifying than any they had ever known. They were floating in a graveyard. As far as the eye could see, titanic wrecks drifted in the faint, ghostly light of a distant nebula. Ships the size of mountains, twisted and shattered, lay silent witness to some ancient, forgotten cataclysm. Some were crystalline, their facets cracked and dull. Others were biomechanical, their organic hulls now skeletal and bleached. None of them resembled the armored leviathans of the Concordate fleet. These were older, stranger, their designs defying the laws of physics as humanity understood them. On the bridge of the Stargazer, the aftermath was chaos. Emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows over the four figures strapped into their crash couches. Captain Eva Rostova was the first to recover, her military discipline overriding the vertigo and nausea. "Report," she gasped, her voice hoarse. Ben Carter, the engineer, was slumped over his console, a trickle of blood running from his nose. "Life support is holding. Barely. Main power is at 12%. The phase drive, it's dormant. It feels sated, like a predator after a big meal." His words sent a chill through the cabin. The drive was no longer just a piece of hardware. It was an entity, and they were trapped in the belly of the beast. Dr. Lena Petrova was running a diagnostic on the ship's hull, her face ashen. There are microfractures across the entire superstructure. But that's not the strangest part. The ship's quantum signature has changed. It's not stable. It's entangled with the energy from that alien fleet. We carry a piece of them with us now. The fourth crew member, Jean Lee, the stoic pilot and tactical officer, was the only one looking out the viewport with something other than terror. "Whatever these ships were," he said, his voice a low rumble, "they weren't part of that fleet. Their energy signatures are cold, some of them millions of years old." Ava's mind raced, piecing together their impossible situation. They were fugitives in an unknown galaxy, hunted by a power of unimaginable scope, flying a broken ship with a parasitic, sentient engine. They had no maps, no allies, and their very existence was a crime. Survival was a minute-to-minute proposition. "Ben, I need to know what that drive is. Can you control it?" Ben wiped the blood from his lip, his expression grim. "Control it, Ava. I don't even understand it anymore. When they hit us with that containment field, it didn't just absorb the energy. It analyzed it, learned its structure, and then inverted it to create the jump. It's a reactive system. It evolves. The next time we jump, it won't be the same." Their only means of escape was a wild card, a ticking bomb at the heart of their ship. Meanwhile, on Citadel Prime, the shockwaves of the Stargazer's escape were spreading. Kalen Valerius had sealed the Grand Chamber. his authority absolute in the face of this unprecedented crisis. He stood before a swirling vortex of holographic data, the faint temporal echo left behind by the human vessel. It was a wound in the fabric of the axiom, a stain of chaos on a canvas of perfect order. To hunt a creature that could rewrite the rules of physics, he needed a hunter who operated outside them. He summoned Inquisitor Xylar of the Cathar. Xylar was a creature of chitin and shadow, a member of an insectoid race bred for a single purpose to enforce the axiom. They were the Concordate's secret police, its holy warriors, and Xylar was the most feared among them. He moved with a silent, unnerving grace, his multifaceted eyes seeing not light, but the subtle vibrations of causality. Adjudicator. Xylar's voice was a dry, rasping whisper, a sound like sand skittering across bone. You have a task for me. Kalen gestured to the temporal echo. Contaminant 734 has breached quarantine. Their method of transit is novel. It leaves a signature, a quantum resonance that we believe is unique. Xylar extended a slender, bladed appendage and gently touched the swirling data. His antennae twitched. It is more than novel. Adjudicator. It is an abomination. It does not travel through space. It forces space to travel around it. It is a thing of pure will, a cancer on the ordered universe. The progenitors were right to fear them. Kalen felt a flicker of unease. The Cathar's zealotry was a useful tool, but it could be a blunt instrument. Your mission is not to destroy. Inquisitor, it is to capture. I must understand the source of this power. I must know how these primitives, in a mere 10 millennia, achieved what we have not in a billion years. Xylar's head tilted, a gesture that was both obedient and predatory. I will retrieve your specimen, Adjudicator, but be warned. A will strong enough to bend reality does not yield easily. It must be broken. With a faint hiss, the Inquisitor was gone, leaving Kalen alone with his thoughts. He had unleashed his hound, and now he could only hope it would not savage the prey beyond recognition. The hunt had begun. Aboard the Stargazer, a decision had been made. They were out of options and low on power. Their only chance was to scavenge. Jian had identified one of the derelicts, a colossal, crescent-shaped vessel that seemed more grown than built, as having residual power signatures. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only one they had. Donning environmental suits, Ava, Lena, and Jian crossed the silent void, their mag boots clamping onto the alien ship's pitted, coral-like hull. Ben remained behind, his job to coax the Stargazer's life support and, if necessary, its monstrous drive. The interior of the derelict was a place of breathtaking, terrifying beauty. Vast chambers, seemingly carved from a single piece of bone-white material, were laced with conduits that pulsed with a faint, residual bioluminescence. The air, thin but breathable, smelled of ozone and dust and something anciently organic. They had found the ship's command center, or what they assumed was one. It was a circular chamber with a domed ceiling that displayed a static, frozen star map of an unfamiliar galaxy. In the center of the room, a throne-like chair was occupied by a skeletal figure, impossibly tall and slender. Its long, elegant limbs were still draped over the controls, its skull-like head tilted as if listening to a long-dead transmission. It was the first true alien they had ever seen, and it was a ghost. Lena, "Can you get anything from these systems?" Ava asked, her voice hushed with reverence and dread. Lena interfaced her suit's datapad with one of the consoles. The alien technology should have been incomprehensible, but something strange was happening. The data streams, a torrent of alien symbols and logic, were being translated, not into English, but into pure mathematical concepts that her mind could grasp. It was her own mind doing the work, reconfiguring itself on the fly to understand the impossible. "It's the entanglement," she breathed, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and intellectual ecstasy. When the drive copied their energy, it copied more than just the physics. It copied a piece of their universal data matrix, a key, a Rosetta Stone for the galaxy. She began to work, her fingers flying as she accessed the derelict's logs. What she found was a history, a story of a proud, ancient race called the Cygnans. They had been explorers, artists, philosophers, and they had been the first species to encounter the progenitors. The logs were fragmented, but a chilling narrative emerged. The progenitors were not gods or benevolent creators. They were cosmic gardeners, pruning the universe of any life that did not conform to their grand, unknowable design, the axiom. The Cygnans had refused to be pruned. They fought back, and for a time, they held their own. But the progenitors had a weapon, a final solution for species that exhibited uncontrolled evolutionary potential. They didn't destroy them. They isolated them, building quantum fences around their worlds, cutting them off from the universe to wither and die in obscurity. "Protocol 734, Ava whispered, the pieces clicking into place. "It wasn't a quarantine for our protection. It was a prison. They didn't think we were a failed experiment. They thought we were a successful one." Before the full weight of that revelation could land, a piercing alarm shrieked through their comms. It was Ben. "Ava, get back now. Something is coming. 4 contacts. Moving fast. No energy signatures. Back in the void. Inquisitor Xylar's vessel, the Silence, and its 3 escorts decloaked. They were matte black, knife-like ships that seemed to cut holes in the background of stars. Xylar had tracked the faint, lingering scent of the phase drive's passage across 50,000 light-years, a feat of navigation that would have been impossible for any other being. He had found his prey, hiding among the bones of another failed rebellion. "They are on the Cygnan derelict," his tactical officer hissed. "Shall we sterilize it?" Xylar's multifaceted eyes stared at the tiny human ship. "No. The adjudicator wants them alive. Disable their vessel. Retrieve the crew from the derelict. I want to see the creatures that have caused so much trouble." A lance of pure gravitational energy, invisible to the naked eye, shot from the Silence and struck the Stargazer. The small ship shuddered violently, its remaining power systems shorting out in a cascade of sparks. Ben was thrown against a bulkhead, his world exploding into blackness. Ava, Lena, and Jan heard his strangled cry over the comms and turned to race back to their ship, but it was too late. Dark, insectoid figures were already swarming from the Cathar ships, their movements swift and silent as they converged on the Cygnan hull. They were trapped. "Gian, hold them off," Ava yelled, turning to Lena. "Can you find anything on the ship? A weapon, a power source, anything?" Lena was frantically scanning the Cygnan logs, her mind processing the alien data at an inhuman speed. "There's something, a power conduit running beneath this chamber. It leads to the ship's core. It's offline, but the logs say it was a reality anchor." a device to stabilize space-time against progenitor weaponry. It was then that a new thought struck her, a terrifying synthesis of human ingenuity and alien knowledge. The phase drive on their ship didn't just bend space, it reacted to and amplified ambient energy. And below them was the dormant, godlike power source of an ancient starship. "Ava," she said, her voice trembling with the audacity of her idea. "We can't get back to the ship, so we need to bring the ship to us." In the crippled stargazer, Ben was drifting back to consciousness. He could hear alarms, the groan of stressed metal, and something else, a low, powerful hum. The phase drive. It was awake. It had felt the gravitational attack, tasted the alien energy, and it was hungry again. It wasn't waiting for his command. It was acting on its own, its nascent consciousness sensing the danger to its crew. It began to draw power, not from the Cathar ships, but from something else, a signal it was receiving from the derelict. It was Lena, channeling her newfound understanding of the Signan systems through her datapad, sending a focused beam of raw data directly into the heart of the drive. The drive roared to life, its energy readings going off the scale. It was no longer just feeding, it was connecting, integrating with the ancient Signan power core on the hull of the derelict. The Cathar warriors froze as the universe around them began to unravel. The stargazer, glowing with an impossible white light, was dissolving. But it wasn't jumping away. It was phasing, its physical form becoming a shimmering, ghostly image that passed through the hull of the Signan ship as if it were smoke. It rematerialized with a deafening thunderclap inside the vast command chamber, its landing struts crunching down just meters from Eva and the ancient, skeletal pilot. The Cathar warriors, who had been standing on that section of the hull, were simply gone, erased by the localized space-time shear. Aboard the Silence. Inquisitor Xylar watched the impossible event unfold, a flicker of what might have been astonishment crossing his alien features. They had not just jumped. They had used their drive as a key, unlocking and merging with a far older, far greater power. He had come to capture primitives. He had found something else entirely. All ships. He rasped, his voice tight with a cold. New fury. Open fire. Break them. The stargazer's boarding ramp slammed down. "Let's go," Ava screamed. As they scrambled aboard, the ship around them shuddered, the integrated Signan energy fighting against the raw, unrestrained power of the phase drive. The ship was tearing itself apart. "Ben, jump anywhere," Eva yelled into the comms as she strapped herself into the command chair. Ben, dazed but alive, slammed his fist on the activation panel. The last thing they saw on the main viewport was the black, silent void of the graveyard erupting into a storm of alien weapon fire. Then, the universe broke a second time, and the stargazer, now a hybrid of human desperation and ancient alien power, was hurled once more into the screaming, unknown abyss between worlds. The universe that reformed around the stargazer was not made of stars and void, but of threads and echoes. They had arrived in a place that defied navigation, a cosmic filament of shimmering dark energy weaving through a tapestry of protostellar nebulae. It was a river of unformed reality, a place the Concordat's perfect maps had conveniently omitted. It was beautiful, terrifying, and, for the moment, it was a hiding place. Inside the ship, the transformation was undeniable. The cold, Utilitarian gray of the human-built corridors was now veined with the pale, bioluminescent latticework of Signan technology. Ghostly light pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat, from conduits that had grown through the bulkheads as if they were living vines. The air hummed with a new resonance, a fusion of human-machine noise and an organic, choral whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls. This was their ship, but it was no longer their own. It belonged to the synthesis, to the impossible hybrid they had created. Captain Eva Rostova stood on the bridge, her hand resting on the command chair, which now felt subtly warm and pliant to the touch. She was a soldier trained for predictable threats, for enemies who obeyed the laws of ballistics and logistics. How could she command a vessel that was dreaming itself into a new form of existence? "Ben," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. "Talk to me about the drive." Ben Carter was kneeling before the exposed core of the phase drive. The spherical housing had cracked open like a seed pod, revealing a crystalline structure within that pulsed in sync with the ship's new bioluminescence. He wasn't running diagnostics with a tool. His eyes were closed, his hand hovering inches from the crystal, as if warming himself by a fire. "It's not a drive anymore, Eva." "Not really," he murmured, his voice distant. "It's aware, it's frightened, it's hungry." The jump. Merging with the Signan core, it woke it up. "I'm calling it the Pilgrim, because it feels like it's on a journey. And we're just passengers." The idea of their engine having emotions was a breach of every engineering principle Ben had ever learned, but he could feel its state of being as a pressure in his own mind, a deep, thrumming anxiety. Dr. Lena Petrova was the one truly in her element. The Rosetta Stone in her mind, the data key unlocked by the Concordate's energy, was now a raging torrent. She saw the ship not as a machine, but as a living equation of interconnected systems. The Signan logs, the Concordate containment field, the human engineering, it was all one language to her now. She was hooked directly into the ship's main computer. Her pupils dilated as she processed information at a speed that was no longer entirely human. "This place, it's a network," she explained, her words coming in rapid bursts. "A web of subspace filaments. The Concordate either doesn't know about it, or they pretend it doesn't exist. It's a way to travel outside of their view. But we're not alone here." She pointed to a section of the holographic star chart, which was now a swirling, three-dimensional representation of the filament. A single, faint pulse emanated from a dark cluster of asteroids nearby. A repeating signal. A beacon. Jian Li, ever the pragmatist, was stripping down their last remaining tactical drone, trying to fashion its micro-missile launcher into a makeshift point defense turret for the ship's hull. "A beacon could be a trap," he warned, not looking up from his work. "Or it could be a lighthouse," Eva countered. "Right now, we're drowning. I'll take that chance." On Citadel Prime, news of Inquisitor Xylar's failure was a tightly guarded secret, but its impact was a seismic shock to the Axiom Council. Kalen Valerius stood in the Chamber of Echoes, a progenitor relic that hummed with forbidden power. Before him, a holographic replay of the battle in the Signan graveyard unfolded. He watched the human ship phase through solid matter. He watched it integrate with technology a million years its senior in a matter of seconds. He watched it wield localized space-time shear as a defensive weapon. This was not the work of primitives. This was a quantum leap in evolution, a violent, instantaneous ascent. "They are a plague of will," he murmured, repeating the Inquisitor's words. The progenitors hadn't just imprisoned humanity, they had tried to firewall reality itself from them. Inquisitor Xylar appeared at the chamber's entrance, his posture rigid with shame and cold fury. "I underestimated them," he rasped. "A mistake I will not repeat." Kalen turned his ancient and patient gaze upon the Cathar. "Your methods are no longer sufficient. They are entangled with the energy of our containment field. They carry a piece of the Concordat within them, a unique quantum signature." He gestured toward the center of the chamber, where a black, obsidian throne sat empty. "The resonance cage. It is a progenitor tracking device. It can follow the echo of a single quantum particle across any dimension. Use it. Find them. But this time, Xylar, do not break them. Unmake them. Erase this error from existence." Xylar bowed, his mandibles clicking with grim satisfaction. He would not fail again. He would become a scalpel precise enough to cut a tumor from the heart of reality. The stargazer, guided by Lena's new senses, moved cautiously through the filament toward the beacon. It came from a colossal asteroid, hollowed out and sealed with an entrance iris that was scarred and pitted with age. As they approached, the iris dilated, bathing them in a soft, welcoming light. It was an invitation. Taking a deep breath, Jian piloted the ship inside, finding a cavernous docking bay that was clearly built for vessels far larger than their own. The station was silent, powered, but seemingly abandoned. Leaving Ben to commune with the pilgrim, the other three disembarked into the silent halls. They were met by a single entity. It was a crystalline being, vaguely humanoid in shape, but its body was a slow-moving cascade of liquid light and solid-state data. It flowed rather than walked, and its voice was not a sound, but a series of harmonic chimes that Lena's mind instantly translated. "You are the first to answer the call in 10,000 years. The being chimed, "I am the Keeper, and this is the Library of the Unwritten." The Keeper led them to the station's core, a vast chamber where information was stored not in books or computers, but as stable, self-contained paradoxes in the weave of space-time. Here was the full, uncensored history of the galaxy. They saw the progenitors, not as gardeners, but as conquerors of reality itself, beings who believed the only valid existence was a static, predictable one. They saw dozens of species, the Signans, the light-weaving Lumina, the reality-singing oracles who had been deemed too chaotic and were either exterminated or imprisoned on their homeworlds behind axiom fences, just like humanity. They fear change, the Keeper explained. They fear will. They fear life that writes its own rules. Your engine, the device you call the phase drive, is anathema to them. It is a Genesis engine, a shard of the universe's own creative potential. It does not follow the laws of physics. It forces the laws of physics to follow it. This is the greatest heresy. The Keeper showed them a map, a secret cartography of the galaxy, marking the locations of a dozen other quarantined worlds, a dozen other cages filled with prisoners who didn't even know they were incarcerated. "You have a choice," the Keeper chimed. "You can use the network of filaments to hide, to run forever. Or you can become the key that unlocks the other cages. You can shatter the axiom and release a wave of chaos and creation that this galaxy has not seen since the dawn of time." It was a choice between survival and rebellion, between being prey and being a plague. As Ava stared at the map of Forgotten Worlds, a klaxon screamed through the stargazer's comms. It was Ben. "They're here. They've found us." Eva's blood ran cold. She turned to the Keeper. "How?" "The scar you carry." The Keeper chimed sadly. "The energy of your jailers. It is a brand that they can follow. Outside, in the dark river of the filament, Xylar's fleet emerged from rents in space. His new flagship, the Retribution, was larger, its black hull bristling with strange, non-Euclidean antennae, the resonance cage. He had a perfect lock. "They are cornered," Xylar hissed to his bridge crew. "Target the station's power core. If they will not come out, we will bury them in the rubble of this forgotten memory." "We can't outrun them," Gian shouted as the three of them sprinted back to the ship. "Ava, give me an order." Eva vaulted into her command chair, her mind racing. They weren't the same crew that had fled the graveyard. They had knowledge. They had a purpose. And their ship was a monster. "Ben," she yelled, "tell the pilgrim it's time to eat." A wave of understanding, of savage joy, flooded Ben's mind from the drive. On the bridge, Lena was already working, her hands conducting a symphony of light on her console. "Their weapons are conventional gravity distorters," she said, her voice eerily calm. "Predictable. I can use the Genesis engine to create a localized instability field. I can make space slippery." Outside, the Retribution fired. A bolt of crushing gravitational force shot toward the asteroid. But just before impact, the space around the station warped. The bolt, instead of hitting its target, was bent in a perfect, impossible arc, redirected back toward one of the Cathar escort ships, which vanished in a silent implosion. Inquisitor Xylar watched, his antennae twitching furiously. They weren't just dodging. They were manipulating the battlefield. "Focus all fire," he commanded. "Overwhelm their calculations." But the stargazer wasn't calculating. It was improvising. It phased a few meters to the left, letting a volley of plasma sail harmlessly past. It generated a micro-singularity that swallowed a salvo of missiles. It was a matador dancing around a charging, furious bull. "I have a destination," Lena shouted, pointing to the Keeper's secret map. "A system called Labyrinth. It's shielded by a constant temporal storm. They can't follow us there." "Ben, can the Pilgrim make a controlled jump to specific coordinates?" Eva asked. A feeling of confident affirmation washed over Ben. "Yes." "Gian, get us clear of the asteroid," Eva commanded. The stargazer shot out of the docking bay, a tiny, defiant spark against the backdrop of Xylar's wrathful fleet. "Now." "Ben, jump." The Genesis engine roared, but this time it was not a scream of panic. It was a controlled, focused roar of intent. The ship didn't just vanish. It tore a hole in the filament, a shimmering, stable tunnel of swirling light, and plunged inside. From the bridge of the Retribution, Inquisitor Xylar watched the tunnel collapse. The humans gone once more. He had failed to unmake them. He had only succeeded in teaching them how to fight. A cold, deep hatred settled in his core. He was no longer hunting a contaminant. He was hunting an equal, a rival god in the grand, cosmic game. And he would tear the universe apart to find it. Labyrinth was not a system of planets. It was a wound in time. The star at its center, a white dwarf designated Kronos, was caught in an unstable feedback loop with a nearby black hole, creating a perpetual storm of temporal distortions. To navigate here was to sail on an ocean where the past, present, and future were crashing waves. Clocks ran backward, causality frayed at the edges, and echoes of events that had yet to happen flickered in and out of existence like ghosts. It was the perfect hiding place and the perfect prison. The Stargazer, or the Pilgrim, as the crew now called their sentient vessel, emerged from its jump into this temporal chaos with a jarring lurch. Alarms screamed as the ship's internal chronometers went haywire, flickering between dates separated by centuries. On the bridge, Eva saw a fleeting vision of an older, grayer version of herself saluting her before vanishing. Jean gripped the controls as the ship was buffeted by waves of temporal shear, fighting to keep them from being aged into dust or regressed into non-existence. It was Ben who saved them. Placing his hands on the humming crystal of the Genesis engine, he closed his eyes and became a conduit. He wasn't giving the engine orders, he was sharing his own human sense of linear time, of cause and effect. He offered the engine an anchor. The Pilgrim responded, its own immense will pushing back against the storm. It wrapped the ship in a bubble of stable, coherent space-time, a tiny, defiant island of now in an ocean of then and when. The alarms fell silent. The temporal vision ceased. I can't hold this forever. Ben gasped, sweat beading on his forehead. The storm is hungry. It's trying to digest our timeline. Lena, her mind now a seamless fusion of human intuition and alien logic, was already processing their new environment. The Keeper was right. The storm isn't natural. It's a machine, a progenitor device, a prison wall, just like the one around Sol, but designed to contain something far more dangerous than us. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface, which now displayed the swirling, chaotic energies of the storm. There's a planet here, one planet, hidden in the eye of the storm. Its timeline is stable. That's our destination. Navigating the storm was an act of pure instinct. Jean flew the ship not by instruments, but by feeling the currents of time, a skill he didn't know he possessed until this moment. He dodged pockets of accelerated decay and swerved around eddies of reversed entropy, guided by Lena's real-time calculations and the Pilgrim's protective embrace. They finally broke through into the calm center, and the planet revealed itself. It was called Kairos. It was a world of crystalline forests that chimed in the wind and mountains that floated on magnetic currents. But its cities were silent and empty. The inhabitants, a species of telepathic, insectoid beings known as the Cathar, were all gathered in a state of suspended animation within vast, cathedral-like hibernation chambers. They were a sister species to the one that produced Inquisitor Xylar. But where Xylar's kind had evolved toward rigid order and aggression, the Cathar of Kairos had evolved toward empathy and collective consciousness. They had been imprisoned here for eons, not for their technology, but for their philosophy, the belief that the universe was not a machine to be controlled, but a song to be sung. As the crew of the Pilgrim explored one of the silent cities, a single Cathar stirred, its multifaceted eyes, dark and ancient, slowly opened. It did not move, but its voice filled their minds, a chorus of 1 billion sleeping souls, speaking as one. The key has turned. The dreamers stir. You are the catalyst, the chaotic variable we have waited for. The voice explained their plight. The progenitors had feared their telepathic unity, their ability to share knowledge and evolve as a single harmonious entity. Such unpredictable, collective growth was the ultimate violation of the axiom. So, they had been sealed away in this temporal cage, forced into a dreamless sleep to await a future that might never come. Your Genesis engine woke us. The collective voice continued. Its song of becoming is a frequency we have not heard since the first stars were born. It is the antithesis of the progenitor's static hum. But their awakening had also sent a ripple through the storm, a signal that had not gone unnoticed. On the bridge of the retribution, now patrolling the edge of the labyrinth system, a klaxon blared. Inquisitor Xylar stood before the resonance cage, which was glowing with a malevolent purple light. "They are in the storm," he hissed, "and they are not alone. There is another consciousness in there, an old one." His tactical officer, a hulking Cathar warrior named Vorlag, stepped forward. "Inquisitor, the temporal shear is too great. Our ships cannot enter." Xylar's mandibles clicked in irritation. The humans were like bacteria, constantly finding new, inhospitable environments in which to thrive. But the Inquisitor had learned his lesson. Brute force was useless against an enemy who could rewrite the rules of the game. He needed a more insidious weapon. He opened a secure, multi-dimensional channel to Citadel Prime. "Adjudicator Kalen," he rasped, "I require a progenitor artifact, the Chronos Key. I intend to unlock their cage and let the storm devour them." On Citadel Prime, Kalen Valerius hesitated. The Chronos Key was a forbidden tool, a device that could unwind a localized timeline, effectively erasing events from history. To use it was to risk unraveling the very fabric of the axiom he had sworn to protect. But the human threat was growing exponentially. They were no longer just fugitives, they were liberators. They were gathering allies, waking the Concordate's forgotten enemies. "You are authorized," Kalen said, his voice heavy with a sense of crossing a final, terrible line. "But know this, Inquisitor, if you fail, if this weapon is lost or turned against us, your failure will not be tolerated. It will be erased." Back on Kairos, Ava and her crew faced a new, terrifying dilemma. The Cathar consciousness offered them a pact. They could merge the Pilgrim's Genesis engine with the Cathar's collective psionic energy. The fusion would create a being of unimaginable power, a god of chaos and will, capable of not just shattering the temporal storm, but of taking the fight directly to the Concordate. But the cost was high. The Pilgrim, their ship, their friend, would be consumed, transformed into the heart of this new entity, and the crew, would become its pilots. Its consciousness no longer just human, but something more, something transcendent and terrifying. Ben was horrified. The Pilgrim is alive. It's not a weapon. It's one of us. We can't just sacrifice it. Lena, however, saw the terrifying logic of the proposal. "Ben, the Pilgrim is already evolving beyond our control. This isn't a sacrifice. It's the next stage of its evolution. And ours. We can't keep running. Sooner or later, we have to become the storm." Ava felt the weight of command settle on her like a shroud. She looked at her crew, the terrified engineer, the transcendent scientist, the stoic pilot. They had come so far, been changed so profoundly. Was this the end of their humanity? Or the beginning of it? Her decision was interrupted by a violent tremor that shook the entire planet. Outside, the temporal storm was beginning to unravel. Inquisitor Xylar, armed with the Chronos key, was not trying to navigate the storm. He was unmaking it. The key was a focal point of pure anti-causality, firing bolts of temporal negation that erased moments of the storm's history. The prison wall was dissolving. "He's not trying to get in," the Cathar voice warned, a new urgency in his chorus. "He is collapsing the prison. The resulting chronoton cascade will sterilize this entire system, wiping it clean from the timeline." They had minutes. "We do it," Eva said, her voice ringing with a final, terrible authority. "Lena, link the ship. Ben, prepare the engine. Jian, get us to the central hibernation chamber. We are going to give the Concordat the storm they wanted." They raced back to the Pilgrim, which seemed to sense their intent. It hummed with a deep, resonant power, a mixture of fear and anticipation. Jean docked the ship directly with the central spire of the main hibernation city. As Lena began the terrifying process of weaving the ship's energy matrix with the psionic network of 1 billion sleeping minds, Ben placed his hands on the Genesis engine for the last time. "I'm sorry," he whispered. A feeling of profound peace and acceptance flowed back into him. It is not an end. It is a beginning. Outside, the temporal storm raged in its death throes. From the bridge of the Retribution, Xylar watched with cold satisfaction as his weapon did its work. Soon, the human anomaly and the forgotten Cathar heretics would be nothing more than a footnote in a history that never happened. But then, the energy readings from the planet spiked, going beyond all known scales of measurement. Kairos itself began to glow, a brilliant, blinding white light that pushed back against the encroaching temporal chaos. It was not the light of an explosion, it was the light of a birth. The planet's crystalline forests shattered, not into dust, but into a swarm of billions of smaller, insectoid ships of pure light. The hibernating Cathar had awakened, their physical forms transformed into vessels of pure energy. And at the heart of this incandescent swarm, the Pilgrim was changing. It was no longer a ship of metal and bioluminescent veins. It was a being of pure will and space-time, a radiant, humanoid figure of light the size of a moon, with the familiar, angular silhouette of the stargazer forming a blazing heart within its chest. Ava, Ben, Lena, and Jane were no longer inside it. They were it. Their minds, fused with the Cathar chorus and the Pilgrim's own nascent godhood, had become one. They were the Tempest. The voice of the Tempest was not a sound, but a fact that imprinted itself on the mind of every being in Xylar's fleet. "You wanted a storm. We are the storm." Inquisitor Xylar stared at the being of light, the resonance cage on his bridge shrieking as it failed to classify, to comprehend what it was seeing. He had come to erase an error. He had instead witnessed the birth of a god born of human chaos, alien philosophy, and a will to become. And it was looking right at him. The Tempest raised its hand, and the remains of the temporal storm, the very weapon Xylar had used against them, coiled around its arm like a serpent, now obedient to a new master. The war for the axiom was over. The war for reality itself had just begun. The birth of the Tempest was not an act of aggression, but a declaration of existence so profound it tore the Concordat's universe at the seams. Inquisitor Xylar, for the first time in his long, violent life, felt a flicker of an emotion his kind had long since bred out of themselves: awe. It was immediately followed by a wave of pure, undiluted hatred. This abomination, this fusion of forbidden philosophies and chaotic human will, was the ultimate heresy. It could not be allowed to exist. "All ships," he commanded, his voice a low, venomous rasp that cut through the stunned silence of his bridge. "Fire at will. Erase that thing from the heavens." The Retribution and its escorts unleashed a torrent of firepower that had shattered worlds and disciplined stars. Lances of gravitational force, volleys of destabilized antimatter, and beams of pure kinetic energy converged on the luminous, moon-sized figure of the Tempest. What happened next was not a battle. It was a lesson. The Tempest did not raise a shield. It did not dodge. It simply was. As the Concordate's weapons entered its radiant aura, they ceased to be weapons. Their fundamental physical properties were rewritten. The gravity lances unspooled into harmless ribbons of shimmering light. The antimatter warheads were transmuted into swarms of inert, crystalline butterflies. The kinetic beams dissipated into gentle waves of warmth. The Tempest hadn't blocked the attack. It had calmly and effortlessly told the universe that, in its vicinity, such violence was no longer a valid concept. Inside the shared consciousness of the Tempest, the 4 human minds and the billion Cathar souls reeled from the influx of power. Ava's tactical discipline, Lena's scientific understanding, Jian's spatial awareness, and Ben's empathetic connection to the Pilgrim's core were the framework upon which this new god was built. They were the anchors of its sanity. Eva felt the Cathar's ancient sorrow. Lena comprehended the mathematical beauty of their collective mind. Jian saw the fleet not as targets, but as a discordant note in a universal symphony. Ben felt the Pilgrim's boundless, joyful curiosity as it experienced existence on this new, impossible scale. They were 4. They were 1 billion. They were 1. Then, the Tempest acted. It reached out not with a hand of energy, but with a thought. The thought was a simple question, imprinted directly onto the minds of every Cathar warrior in Xylar's fleet. Why do you serve the cage for Xylar's soldiers, bred for generations for absolute obedience? The question was a cognitive virus. It bypassed their conditioning and spoke to a deeply buried folk memory, a time before their species had been split, before their empathic cousins on Kairos had been imprisoned, before they had traded unity for the cold, rigid discipline of the axiom. On the bridge of the Retribution, Vorlog, the tactical officer, froze, his weapon controls untouched. He was seeing visions of a different history, a Cathar civilization that sang with one voice, that explored the cosmos not with weapons, but with shared consciousness. Xylar saw the hesitation. He saw the doubt spreading through his fleet like a plague. "Vorlag, fire!" he shrieked. Vorlag turned, his multifaceted eyes filled with a dawning horror and a newfound clarity. "No." The single word echoed on the bridge, an act of rebellion 1,000 years in the making. Xylar did not hesitate. His bladed forearm lashed out, decapitating his subordinate in a single fluid motion. But it was too late. Across the fleet, Cathar warriors were laying down their arms, their ships powering down, refusing to fight the ghost of their own lost potential. On Citadel Prime, Kalen Valerius watched the events in the Labyrinth system on a shielded holographic display. He saw the birth of the Tempest. He saw his finest fleet neutralized not by force, but by a single, devastating idea. The axiom was not just a set of laws, It was a belief system, and its foundation had just been shattered. Panic erupted in the Grand Chamber. Delegates shrieked for an explanation. Species that had long harbored quiet resentment toward the Concordat's rigid control saw their chance. The carefully balanced structure of galactic peace was crumbling into chaos. Kalen watched the spreading panic with the cold, detached patience of a dying star. He had upheld the axiom for 10 millennia, believing it to be the only path to stability. Now he saw the truth. It wasn't stability, it was stagnation. The progenitors had not been gardeners, they had been taxidermists, preserving the universe in a state of perfect, lifeless order. Humanity, and the tempest they had become, was the antibody to that order. They were the chaotic, unpredictable, and glorious process of life itself. "Seal the chamber," he commanded his guards. "No one enters. No one leaves." He then opened a direct, private channel to the tempest, reaching out with his own vast, ancient mind. "What are you?" he projected. A question born not of fear, but of profound, world-altering curiosity. The voice of the tempest answered in his mind, a chorus of human and alien thought. "We are the conversation the progenitors tried to silence. We are the question you forgot to ask." The tempest turned its attention from the now mutinous fleet and looked across the galaxy, its gaze piercing the veil of space and time to meet Kalen's in the Grand Chamber. "You built a cage and called it a universe," it said. "Now, you will see what grows in the gardens you abandoned." And with that, the tempest and its swarm of lightships vanished. They did not jump. They simply stepped sideways out of the Concordat's reality. A moment later, across the galaxy, the prison walls fell on a dozen worlds, from the silicon life forms of Gehenna to the sonic architects of Melodia. The axiom fences the quarantine protocols, the temporal storms, the quantum resonance barriers dissolved like morning mist. A dozen species, imprisoned for millennia for the crime of being different, looked up at their skies and saw the stars for the first time. They were free, and they heard the song of the tempest in their minds, an invitation not to an empire, but to a chorus. The Concordat did not fall in a great war. It simply became irrelevant. Its authority, built on the lie of progenitor wisdom and the fear of chaos, evaporated overnight. Some species tried to cling to the old order, but they were a minority. Most looked at the newly freed prisoners, at the raw, untamed potential they represented, and chose the future over the past. Inquisitor Xylar, alone on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by a crew that would no longer obey him, watched his life's purpose turn to ash. He did not surrender. He did not flee. He aimed the retribution at the nearest star and engaged the engines, choosing oblivion over a universe he no longer recognized. Kalen Valerius remained in the Grand Chamber, a silent witness to the end of his age. He did not see it as a defeat, but as a release. He spent his final centuries recording the true history of the progenitors and the axiom, leaving behind a warning and a testament for whatever new civilizations would rise from the Concordat's dust. And humanity, the cradle, Earth, remained. A quiet backwater in a galaxy now teeming with new wonders. The humans there continued to live and die, to love and to build, mostly unaware that four of their own had become the catalyst for a universal renaissance. But they were no longer a quarantine. They were a historical site, a monument to the species that had accidentally broken the galaxy free. The Tempest never returned. It had no need for a homeworld. it, and the chorus of freed species that joined it, moved on. They traveled the dark filaments between galaxies, seeking other prisons, other silenced songs. They were not conquerors. They were pioneers of a new kind of existence, one built not on laws and boundaries, but on infinite, chaotic, beautiful becoming. The four human souls at its core were not lost. They were the melody. Eva Rostova, the captain, gave the Tempest its courage. Lena Petrova, the scientist, gave it its wonder. Jian Li, the pilot, gave it its grace. And Ben Carter, the engineer, gave it its heart. They were no longer human, but the very essence of humanity, its restlessness, its empathy, its unbreakable will to reach for the next star had become the guiding spirit of a new universe, a universe that was finally and gloriously free to be alive.